Can you please tell us your name, your occupation and your address?
My name's Caroline Jane Paterson. Currently I'm an environmental consultant. I would like to acknowledge the First Nations peoples of Kangaroo Island, which include the Nurrungeri, Rumangeri, Narungga and Kaurna people, and pay respect to their elders past, present and emerging.
Thank you. Can you please tell us your background and how you came to live at Kangaroo Island?
Yeah, sure. I have been a park ranger with the National Parks and Wildlife Service, working for state government since early 2000s. A park ranger in 3 regions, being Yorke Peninsula, Fleurieu Peninsula and most recently Kangaroo Island. I came here in 2011 in a leadership role and accepted a redundancy package in February 2019 because my values no longer aligned with the department, and I was having mental health issues and stress issues relating to that. And when I left, I was the ranger in charge of Kangaroo Island Parks.
Thank you. Prior to the recent fire season, where were you living on Kangaroo Island?
We were renting a large house from the forestry industry, Kangaroo Island Plantation Timbers, west of Kangaroo Island, which was in amongst a blue gum plantation. But we also own a acreage of about 320 acres out on the northwest coast of the island.
Thank you. Can you describe the roles that you and your family have and have had in the community over the time that you've been in Kangaroo Island?
Yeah, I guess more so before I was on Kangaroo Island, I was an active member of the Department of Environment's Country Fire Service Brigade for about 16 years. And I have also been involved in emergency response planning and management as part of my role as Ranger in Charge. In the community, my daughter attends the Pandana campus of the Kangaroo Island Community Education, which is our local school. She also plays netball for the Western District's Community Sports Club. My partner is a plumber and gas fitter, so he has his own small business. And I'm a member of the Kangaroo Island Friends of Parks volunteers for the Kangaroo Island Western Districts group. I'm also in Kangaroo Island Eco Action, and I volunteer for BirdLife Australia as well.
You're a very active community member.
I'm exhausted.
Can you describe the natural environment of Kangaroo Island as it was before the recent fire season?
Yeah, sure. Can I just turn pages? My notes? Yeah. Okay, so Kangaroo Island is one of Australia's 15 biological hotspots. It's been separated from the mainland for probably 7,000 years approximately, which has meant that it's been kept free of a lot of diseases and also some feral animals like foxes and rabbits. Aboriginal occupation for some reason ceased for a long time, and it's not really clearly known why, but the island wasn't therefore subjected to the same fire regimes that Aboriginal people did on the mainland. But what it's ended up with is an environment that has around about a third of the island, which is old growth, intact native vegetation and really critical habitats. The biodiversity hotspots are places with a huge amount of different species, and so we've got 900 plant species, 400 that are endemic or only found here. We have 25 land mammals, 7 microbats, around about 270 birds, 500 different fungi species and 18 reptiles. And we also have 2 of only 3 of the world's monotremes, being the Kangaroo Island echidna and the platypus. Platypus was introduced, but the value of the wilderness landscape on Kangaroo Island was recognised by conservation visionaries in the late 1800s, when they saw the value of these wild places as a place to conserve species that were declining on the mainland, and they fought for 30 years to have the West End set aside. And 100 years ago, last October, was the anniversary of the Flinders Chase Fauna and Flora Reserve being established. And so I have got a photo of what it looks like now, which is unfortunately quite different than it did a few months back. Because of the absence of foxes and also rabbits, we still have a lot of small mammal species left, and they include a lot of threatened species. So the critically endangered Kangaroo Island dunnart, the southern brown bandicoot. We have so many woodland birds that are threatened on the mainland, and also glossy black cockatoos, bushstone curlews, Bassian thrush, southern emu wrens, and they're all here because there's this diversity of habitats and lots of different stories of vegetation, from leaf litter and fungi through to old growth fallen logs and stags and hollows.
Thank you. Turning now to the ways in which the community prepares for the bushfires, can you describe your knowledge of community bushfire education? Not specific to this, but sort of over the years running up to what people are told about bushfires?
Yeah, I guess there are people who have been living on the island for generations who are quite familiar with fires. Every 10 or 12 years they usually have a big one, is what I've been told. But there is a little bit of complacency, I think, in the preparedness, and I know that the Country Fire Service have tried to engage with community and also tourism industries in trying to educate people to have, response plans for their family, and also to spread the word to tourists and visitors to the island about their need to have their own bushfire survival plan. But I'm not sure how much engagement there's really been. I think, that the community meetings have been quite small. They do the Fiery Women workshop, which is, preparing, I guess, not just women, but often the person at home for how to plan to stay and defend and how to prepare properties. Some people are very prepared. I know of one particular property who his house was saved a couple of years back, well actually just over 12 months ago, by the fact he had planted kikuyu on the north side of his property, and that acted as just a break and saved the house. So there are different levels. You can't brand the whole community with the same brush, but I would say that because we have a third of our visitation to the island being internationals, there needs to probably be a much better focus on pre-visit awareness of the danger of visiting bushfire-prone areas, and also, I guess, the planning of both tourism and accommodation developments needs to really think very long and hard about the design of facilities and the location of facilities, because there are a couple of examples like Hanson Bay and Vivon Bay, which are one way in, one way out, and we were very lucky not to lose Vivon Bay in the recent fires. And of course, over in Victoria, there were entrapments in those areas where lots of visitors, the visitation season aligns with the fire season, making it very, very dangerous. And it was really, really concerning to hear, the marketing that Kangaroo Island was open for business even when the fires were going, because that is high risk. It's attracting more people to the island, putting them in danger, putting pressure on the resources and putting pressure on the emergency services who then have to manage them. So that was very concerning.
Thank you. On the education front, specifically with children, with your daughter at the local school, do you know if there's any education programs around bushfires that are run through the school?
They do have drills. The Pandana campus is one of very few last resort refuges because they've got the great big oval there. So I know that they do drills. On days of catastrophic fire danger, the schools close in South Australia because the buses are having to travel through dangerous areas. But I can't tell you if there's any specific programs by CFS directed at the school. I'm sorry.
That's fine. When it was in the lead up to this particular bushfire season, were there particular planning or organisation or preparations that were done in advance of potential for fires?
Well, I guess every year landowners are sent notices to reduce their fuel loads, and that's not just vegetation, native vegetation, that's also grasses and fine fuels and weeds, which carry fire very quickly. Having said that, there's still some very, very long grass and weeds along the roadsides, which up until the break in the season, every time I drove through, I was starting to sweat. So all I could see was a wick. But then there are people who see the same when they see the corridors of native vegetation. So with regard to council, I guess council has limited resources on the island to do all of the deliverables that are required for roads and fire prevention, and so I guess they're limited as to how much they can achieve, but the same goes for the Department for Environment and Water, and following the 2007 fires, there was a huge amount of resources thrown into the state government's fire management branch within the Department for Environment, Water and Natural Resources, or one of its many names. And they did fire management plans, one of which I've attached. If you want to have a look at the degree of planning that goes into the department's management plans. They also employed a lot of staff, bought plant and equipment, and started implementing a lot of fire prevention measures, and that includes prescribed burning, and it also includes physical removal of fuel loads. However, each year the budgets get cut. Each year, where the department expects that you do more with less, work more efficiently, you lose staff, and you just cannot deliver everything. At the same time, the climate's changing. So we're getting longer, drier summers, and there's less of a window of opportunity to do a prescribed burn, which is called a prescribed burn because there are very strict prescriptions to enable it to be lit, which is about relative humidity, temperature, wind speeds, wind changes, soil moisture, vegetation moisture, all those types of things. So you've got longer bushfire seasons, shorter periods in which to actually do any sort of fire prevention methods. Then you also have quite a high rainfall, which means trying to do works on tracks results in bogged vehicles. It's very difficult to traverse some of the West End parks even in the fire season because there are some very swampy areas there that make access quite difficult. So you do what you can with the resources that you have. And I know that there has been a number of prescribed burns in the West End over the last recent years. And one of those burns did help to protect a rather large strip of native vegetation, which will be very critical habitat on the northwest. But then there's also large tracts of hard and softwood forestry, which have been planted more than 20 years ago. Currently, there's no way to get them off the island, and so they haven't been as well maintained over the years as they would be if they were actually being sold and replanted, I guess. And they don't have very good resources either in which to maintain and also suppress fires when they start.
Yeah, thank you. In respect of your property and your home at that time, were there any preparations that you and your family specifically took?
In the home that we were renting, it was not defendable. So every year we did a bushfire survival plan, regardless of where we were living. Previously it had been in Kelly Hill Conservation Park. Our plan was to evacuate and that house burnt down. After that, we were in the Karata Parks residence. Our plan was to evacuate. That house burnt down. And now, more recently, in the Blue Gums house, we didn't have any outside water. So we had no way of defending that house. It was in the middle of a blue gum plantation. It had timber decking. There was no way we could actually defend it. And so we planned to evacuate. Because the Duncan fire started on the 20th of December and the fires actually started much earlier this year. So as we know, the rainforests were burning in September. Now, you know there's climate change when rainforests burn because they're a closed system. So something's going on, but we also had fires on the island before the fire danger season. Then in December the 20th, the Duncan fire started. Ignition was by a lightning strike. Now, historically, in my experience, the lightning strikes do start fires. It's a natural way of igniting native vegetation. And usually there is enough moisture in the soil and vegetation to allow a fire to trickle around and burn a patch and then leave other areas unburnt, go out, and that provides a natural break for next year. But it also provides a range of different habitat types and age classes, which provides for the needs of a whole heap of diverse species. So from, little seedlings right through to old growth hollows. Now, those lightning storms, since I've been on the island, we've expected them around about October, November. And, these ones were December, January. It'd be interesting to see what the patterns have been over time. However, that lightning strike lit up very close to our own property. And we had very little fuel in the form of grass on our property because we never improved the pastures. We just have 8 fairly happy cows out there. But it did take out our fences, 3 patches of native vegetation and some creosote posts that we had laying on the ground, which was only minor damage. We were very, very lucky.
Before we go on, and I'll move on to the fires, but just so that we don't lose track of it, you referred to the fire management plan?
Yep.
The fire management plan, Flinders Chase, that you're looking at, can you please describe that document for me?
Yeah, so this is the management plan that was updated in 2009 and I think was due to expire in 2019. It sets up the Department for Environment's planning for suppression, prevention, and also management of fires, and also it zones the park and identifies areas of high asset value for the protection of human life and property, and also high conservation value for the protection of habitats and threatened species. This document has to be has to go out to public consultation. So there's a team of people involved in writing it. So that's what the Department for Environment work under.
Thank you very much. Now, if you're comfortable doing so, I'm going to turn to the period of time when the fires came over.
Mm-hmm.
How many people do you normally have on Kangaroo Island in an off season?
Oh, that's a good question. So we've got a resident base of about 4,500 people. Then you have your off-island rate-paying people who have holiday homes and either utilise them throughout the year or rent them out. We get, I think, around about 250,000 visitors a year, but I couldn't tell you. I mean, most of the visitation, the peak period coincides with fire danger season. So it's really Christmas, September school holidays, Easter, but the Christmas period is the kicker, like Christmas, New Year's, and that's the big school holiday break. And that's when the place is quite manic for at least a couple of weeks.
So this year in that early January period, can you describe what kinds of numbers of tourists you had?
Well, up until the 3rd of January, which is when the ravine fire actually took out everything, the island was marketing that it was still open for business. So there were still people coming to the island. After the ravine fire took out 89 homes and about 40,000 head of livestock and assets and fence lines, thousands of kilometres of fence lines and livelihoods and pastures and native species and habitats, they finally put the brakes on, we're open for business. But yeah, usually it would be our busiest time, yeah. There were enough people, let's just say on the 3rd of January, there were enough people to make it really difficult to manage them on a catastrophic day when the parks and the council campgrounds are closed, because there's no, well, to my knowledge, the commercial tour operators and accommodation providers don't have a consistent approach to managing visitors. I was driving for a commercial tourism operator on the day, the catastrophic day. I had a family from America, they were from California, who were very, very aware because of what they'd been through with the increased amount of fire activity. They'd been evacuated themselves, they were so understanding. And I ended up dropping them off at their hotel early. But the whole day we were just avoiding smoke and on the phone to base to find out what the latest was, and it was really scary. But I know that at that time there were still people who had left people in accommodation in areas with high fire danger, with a going fire, and there were also some tour operators going into areas which potentially were putting people at risk. So I just think that there needs to be consistency between all levels of governments into how we manage it, and also between tourism and accommodation providers into how we manage it. We know that tourism and agriculture are our most important economies on the island, but we need to put public safety above the dollar at this time.
If you're comfortable doing so, I'd like you to describe what your personal experience was through that couple of days. You can do it at a high level if you prefer, or with detail if you feel comfortable doing so.
Okay, so good to go. So then when my friend who lives in the Highlands in Queensland was evacuated by fire in September, and that really scared me to hear that the rainforests were on fire. So I was already at a heightened sense of awareness, and because I'd been, the regional fire duty officer and the parks duty officer through my role as a ranger, I was constantly checking the CFS website, the Bureau of Meteorology's sites for the forecast, and so it became an obsession, to be quite honest, and I wasn't feeling very comfortable about driving on the catastrophic days in particular. And I was in communications with my employer to actually help them to write a response plan for days of heightened fire danger, which we didn't get to do because it all started on the 20th of December, and I was driving on that day as well. That was a catastrophic day. And then on the 3rd, I was driving. So from the 20th of December, my partner and I set up our farm fire unit. We burnt out 2 pumps in the first week, and so then we got a slip-on unit and got our old ute going and put that on. He was out for about 3 weeks, fighting fires day and night, helping friends and strangers, previously with no experience. On Christmas Day...
I'm just going to interrupt for a moment there, because I understand that he was a farm fire unit in one. Can you describe that for us?
Yeah, so particularly local farmers and landowners have their own unit. Usually it's a 4-wheel drive with a 400 to 600 litre tank on the back, or it could have a clear cube on a trailer with 1,000 litres of water on it. Basically, they're set up to defend their pasture, their stock. They can get into some places where big trucks can't get, and they're not bound by the constraints of government and bureaucracy, so they can hit the ground and go. On Christmas Day, which we spent the morning until 7:30 opening presents with my daughter, and then the phone rang and someone said, you need to go and defend your property, it's on your boundary. And so my daughter and I ended up there that day as well, but that evening I remember a phone call to the CFS hotline that I made saying we need to get a bomber to Middle River, because there was a fire roaring up the gully, but of course there was a fire also in the Cuddly Creek vicinity on the mainland, so the resources were stretched. The houses that the fire in the valley across the road from us, the houses that were in the line of that fire were only saved because of those farm fire units. There were 30 of them, 30 blokes, protecting those assets, and they did save them, and the CFS didn't come at all. And I'm not criticising the CFS, because as I said, we had going fires across Australia and multiple big fires in South Australia, but yeah, the benefit of those farm fire units shouldn't be underestimated. Coming from a parks background, I'm also aware that there are issues with them not being trained under the CFS banner. They don't have the same GRN communication that the CFS have, Government Radio Network Communication. There are some issues with safety, personal protective equipment, and there's also a little bit of, or in some cases, there are things that are done probably illegally, which is such as clearing scrub and backburning. But I will say some of the backburning actually resulted in properties being saved. Others probably resolved in more environmental assets definitely being lost.
Yeah.
So, so it was the fire that just kept on giving. There were landowners who had that fire come back through burnt forestry land 3 times and managed to save their house the first time, the second time, and then on the third time they lost their house. They'd moved, they lost a heap of sheep, but they'd moved a herd over to the east of Pandana. The ravine fire wiped out half that flock. It was just a horrendous fire. The loss to this community. I've had conversations with people who have said to me, "Oh, we weren't directly impacted, or at least we didn't lose our house," but they've lost everything else. They've lost their income, they've lost their pasture, their tools, their vehicles, their machinery, their house, and the contents of their house in some cases. Everyone feels like they're doing better than everybody else, whereas really it's impacted the whole community. Small businesses, everybody knows someone who's been directly impacted. Half of the families at the Pandana school, those children have been directly impacted. The Western Districts Football Club, the club in the scrub, was lost in the fire. Little shack settlements down at Hanson Bay. Tough stuff.
Yep. Do you have a view on whether the firefighting resources that were available were sufficient when you take into account the farm units as well as the additional resources that were brought onto the island?
That's really difficult to answer, because you need to recognise that with so many going fires, incident management would be very, very difficult. I don't think there's enough resources actually on Kangaroo Island, and because of the sheer numbers of residents on the mainland compared to over here, obviously when you do a risk assessment, there's a risk for higher loss of life in some of the larger localities on the mainland. So I don't think the resources are good enough, and I don't think they're based on the island. So I know from the Parks Brigade, the numbers of fit, active members has been declining over the years. And we relied over here on the resources from around the state to deliver prescribed burns or come and support us with fire suppression. The people in the CFS and including the Juna Brigade, which is a highly skilled brigade, do a great job at first response. There is no doubt, and they know the land, so that is really, really important. And the support we get from the mainland is amazing, but really I think the first response is potentially the most important. If there are fires that are threatening, or if there's forecast weather conditions that look like turning it into an inferno, which is what happened. We had multiple burnovers with the ravine fire, including on the South Coast Road where a CFS truck was actually overtaken from behind by the fire. Now, that's not normal fire behaviour. It's just a holocaust, and it's not stoppable. It doesn't matter how many fire breaks you've got, or how much you knock down native vegetation. That thing's, ember attack can be happening like kilometres and kilometres ahead, setting alight to anything. Like these asbestos houses that have burnt have exploded. Now, I thought asbestos was supposed to be sort of a bit of a firewall. That's not my experience, and you know, you can refer to the photograph that I've got of our house and what was left of our house, which was just a pile of smashed to pieces asbestos.
Do you want to take a moment and look at that?
Yeah, sure. Yep.
Take a moment.
So, house remains with asbestos debris. Yeah, so I've actually had a house burned down before, not in this type of event, but I was really hoping to salvage something out of that, and I had firearms in a locked standard safe in there, which I was not able to access for months until April. Because of the presence of asbestos and the fact that I don't own the property and that I know about the danger of asbestos. So I was hoping when I went to the clean-up that we may have been able to find some small things, and I did, but most of them were just totally destroyed, as you can see. Even crystal caverns that I had are actually that fragile that they're crumbling. So, yeah.
Thank you. As part of the assistance, the resources that came onto the island, either during or possibly shortly after, I think the Australian Defence Force came.
Yes.
Did you have any involvement? Would you like to describe that assistance, what you thought of it?
Yeah. Look, I guess the ADF were quite remarkable. They did so much for the community. We didn't have them assist us per se because we didn't own the home that was lost, and we had very minimal damage to our actual land. So we sort of let the people who really needed the assistance get the assistance, and they put on concerts for the community. They sang for us. You know, they were really quite amazing. Everyone was amazing. Like the community, the local community was incredible. The South Australian community was incredible. The Australian community was incredible, and even people from overseas. Everybody loves Kangaroo Island, and they seem to love Australia, but Kangaroo Island really seemed to resonate with people from around the world, and I think it's largely to do with the connection with our beautiful wildlife and our wild places. But it wasn't just the ADF, like there were so many local businesses, organisations, churches. We're still getting things arrive. Like last night I had delivered from the community down in the Limestone Coast, or the Narracor area, sorry, doonas for people who had lost their homes. Like, they've done this fundraiser, Dollars for Doonas, and they've bought everyone who's lost their homes doonas and pillows. There's been so much kindness and support. People coming over doing free massages for people, you know, local beauticians doing pedicures. Like, it's just, I've never felt more like part of a community than what I do now, and I really appreciate that. Yeah, and honestly, the support has been overwhelming. Like the Salvation Army, Red Cross, you start naming them and you know you're going to upset someone, but there was so much support. There were issues though. Do you want me to talk about some of those now? Yeah, so one of the things I found quite stressful in the days that followed the Ravine fire, it was great to have the community meetings, but we were really running on adrenaline, and we were just at such a high level of stress and trauma. And when we went to the recovery centres or the relief centres, each time we went there, we had a different person meet us. They were all trying to help, but to have to relive that trauma every time you go in there, you can't remember which form you've filled out, what grant you've applied for. You're freaking out that you're going to have to pay the money back if you duplicate the effort. It would be awesome to have like a database with everybody's name and details on it that whoever you talk to can access, and a case manager straight away. I found out who my case manager is yesterday. I'm so excited, but I had phone calls that weren't returned from the recovery team. And then I had different people ringing me trying to touch base, and I was out of range, and when I rang it was someone else. And so just to have a case manager assigned to each family in need would really help navigate through those avenues of what you're entitled for, what you're not entitled for, where are you going to live. Just, I know it's a big ask, but it would really help.
Yeah. In terms of the effect on the community, are you able to talk at all about physical and mental health, the support that was offered, what the issues are?
Yeah, so I guess I have been getting some help from a psychologist, which has been absolutely invaluable. But also we had Dr. Rob Gordon come over and present to a small group on how children respond to fire. And he also, I'm sorry, I'm distracted by a restless flycatcher that just flew to the window. He came to talk to us about how we can support our children after fire trauma, and he's had significant experience interstate with that. And also he went into detail about the differences between men and women, I guess, and how they respond. When I really worry about the kids who may have experienced the fire at its worst, the kids who, in some cases, their families have lost multiple homes and multiple properties. Pets, like we had a fire plan, our pets, all but stick insects, got rescued, and Toby the turtle got left in his tank because he didn't like travelling in the car, but Nigel did an emergency dash and managed to get him out because it was Jessica's Christmas present, which changed the series of events in a good way. It put him out of a more dangerous situation and into a location where the wind changed early and the house he was trying to protect was saved. But then it took out our house. So there's a lot of hardened locals, you know, fifth generation islanders, crusty old farmers and crusty old tradesmen who don't need any help. We've got this. And you just hope that they take the time to actually be good to themselves and to nurture their families and don't end up losing more. Dr. Gordon said something which really stuck in my head, and he compared the activities of a lot of men who have been fighting fires as the activities afterwards as being like epicormic activities. Now, the epicormic growth is what our eucalypts and other native species do after a burn, and they sprout out all these new leaves. But unfortunately, that doesn't mean the tree's going to survive. A lot of those branches will die, and often the tree itself will die. And that's what can happen to the family, I guess, of the men who don't take the time to actually slow down and you know, grieve, I guess, for what they've lost and face the trauma.
Yeah. Would you mind talking for a bit about the long-term effect of the fires as you understand it to be on the natural environment?
Yes.
If you want to go to any of your photos, let's do that so you can show us what it looks like.
Okay. We're going to go to a photo that I took on a bus trip with the Friends of Parks, Kangaroo Island, through Flinders Chase. And this is what was once our iconic national park. What you can see is that there are basically dunes of moonscape. So there's very little standing material. There's no seeds left on the charred sticks. There's no seed that's fallen into the sand that's covered in ash. And it's likely, due to the intensity of that fire, that there has been burnt soil and seed stock in the soil for quite a depth. Now, even our local fungi expert is concerned that the colonising species of fungi, which help with regeneration, need to have plant matter to attach themselves in the soil. And there is places where there is very, very little of that left. There are also places, more so in the Duncan fire footprint, where there are still lots of seeds that have cracked open, and it was beautiful to see in those places the yellow-tailed black cockatoos feasting on the toasted hakeas and banksias and seeds that had been opened as nature intended by the fire, dropped into the fertile ash bed, and with the rains they will regenerate. But in these very heavily burnt areas, yes, there is some recovery of eucalypts and yuccas mostly, but it's the loss of biodiversity that is the big concern. It's those complex systems that support all of our lives, the services that they provide, from pollination through to clean air, soil, water, keeping the moisture in the soil. Our pharmaceuticals all go back to these things from nature. I can't emphasise the importance of healthy functioning ecosystems enough. We don't even know some of the species that could have been lost in this intense fire. We don't know how small populations have become, which will mean that they're not genetically viable to reproduce. I suspect we will lose species. There's a high level of endemism, or things that are only found on Kangaroo Island, and it's highly likely that a lot of species will no longer have either the population size or the habitat to survive. Now, I may be being pessimistic, but I think I'm actually just being a realist from what I know about the importance of habitat.
Thank you. You spoke to the forum a couple of months ago, early March, and we're now in May.
Yep.
How are you going since then? How's the community going since then? What's changed?
What's changed really is the big change is that it feels like, because of the global pandemic, that perhaps the fire and the climate change issue has been a little bit swept to the side. And I understand the magnitude of COVID-19, and it really scares everybody. But I'm really concerned that a lot of the people who need assistance may be forgotten with the global pandemic, and it's also made it harder to engage with your social networks. Obviously, all the sports shut down, the very thing that holds our remoter communities together. They've lost their sports club. They were still out there training, and then COVID-19 came. The support from the other clubs on the island has been amazing. They were letting us train at their facilities, and now we don't have that. Hopefully we might get a season this year, but I think, that isolation as well from others. So a lot of us were hermits anyway. That's why we want to live in the West End of Kangaroo Island, because we actually prefer the natural environment to being in town. But you still value, you know, your support networks and the community when you do get together. And so that's been taken away. I worry that perhaps some of the promises that have been made by the overwhelming generosity of Australians may not come through. Things that, you know, have been promised to our children, and that hopefully they're just on the back burner. But that's a really bad pun, sorry. But
what kinds of things in particular are you thinking of?
Oh, well, look, people have been incredibly generous with donating things. And one of the things that our kids were promised were bikes. We got trampolines, which is incredible. Like, what a positive thing to give to a family, you know. A trampoline, the kids can burn off energy, it's healthy, it's fun. Yeah, a fantastic thing. Country kids and bikes, same deal. But, you know, some of us haven't replaced bikes because they'd been said that they were going to be donated, which is amazing, and we didn't expect that. But it's just like, I understand if it can't happen, but maybe just let us know so we can go and try and prioritise getting bikes, because getting these kids back into their normal routines is really important.
Yeah. Thank you. We've covered a lot of things, and your thoughts have been great to hear. Is there anything else that you'd like people to know about what could have been done better, either in a preparation sense or during the fires or afterwards?
Yeah, look, one thing that really affected me personally was the fact that I didn't know if I was going to be able to go through my house. And as I said earlier, I knew that there was a chance that there would be things that were salvageable. And in fact, I had a motorbike in the shed, the shed was not asbestos. It was an old Triumph. I've been hoarding it for years. And it had sentimental value, and it would have been great just to get the badge off it if it was still intact, or at least to see that it wasn't. So I'd been in liaison with SAPOL and Forestry about negotiating to be at the house site when the cleanup occurred. That happened. I was advised and given a date, had to change my work shift to be able to make it. When we got out there, the shed had already been removed. And so, you know, there was no chance to look for my late dad's tools. You know, Nigel didn't get to salvage anything from there. I didn't get my badge off my Triumph, or we just didn't get to see, because I think as hard as it was going through the asbestos debris and finding hardly anything, at least I know now what I haven't got. And when you haven't got very much, having the opportunity just to see that for yourself, I think, is really important. That may not be important to everybody, but it was important to me. I think that the housing pods that are being provided are really important, particularly for farmers, to be able to be on their land, to be able to start cleaning up, repairing. It's really hard, and I know this from having a property that I don't live in for 5 years, how hard it is to do stuff on your property when you don't live there. And so much of the housing that is being kindly offered by the community, often at no cost, has been a long way away. So those pods are really important. I know a couple who had a conservation block, or they still do have a conservation block, right in the hottest part of the burn, who actually had accommodation at the east end of the island, but chose to go and live in tents and caravans on their property so that they could start to get their life back together. Now, they've got a pod a week ago, and that's fantastic because it provides them with shelter from, the big winds. There's no shelter from vegetation anymore. So the wind, the rain, the cold, the hail, 70-year-old people, really important to actually make sure that people have adequate housing. So there's that. I think taking advantage of the fact that we can manage pest, plant and animals while there's so much open space. So when you open up areas to disturbance, weeds will get in. Very important to manage those. Feral animals are attracting now pigs and cats around the unburnt areas where the remnant populations, particularly of threatened species, are sheltering. Very important that they are focused on. There's a big push in the community to review and overhaul the Native Vegetation Act. This is a huge concern. There is going to be so much competition for natural resources on our island in the future. The apiarists are going to want to put their honeybees on every last patch of native veg that produces flower, but these flowers also provide nectar for threatened species, pygmy possums, woodland birds, honey eaters. We need to make sure that there is a balance. We're going to have pressure to reduce the numbers of macropods because they're going to be competing with livestock for both pastures that are planted and feed as it comes back. And so pushing down native vegetation is really a huge concern. There were areas during the fires of 7 kilometres of roadside veg that was knocked down and just left laying. Next year that's going to be a fire hazard. It's laying down now. It's at least providing some shelter and a corridor perhaps for ground-based species to move through. But I've got big concerns about how we balance the apiary industry with conservation goals. Also the tourism market, there's going to be the expectation by commercial operators to be able to access areas that are not burnt, so then opening up more wild places, which is a big concern. It's been a priority of the government for several years now to access all areas and to develop and put infrastructure into remote areas, which is just fragmenting habitat. So it's just this ongoing fragmentation of habitat that's happening. So we need to actually use science-based decision making to tackle climate change and to prepare Kangaroo Island and Australia for the future fires that will come along with climate change. Planning and development of building standards needs to be revised to ensure that settlements with only one way in and one way out are discouraged in the future, rather than setting up housing in native vegetation. Maybe we set up the housing in areas that actually already have a break around them. We need to work together with the community to prepare for the future, balancing environmental integrity, tourism, agriculture, social needs and the economy.